Hello, this is a tutorial on how to use the Archivist Toolkit version 2.0. Archivist Toolkit is an open source and therefore free software that allows information professionals, mostly archivists, to help with the intellectual organization of their repository's holdings. It's widely used throughout the profession as it's both free and easy to use. So let's get you set up and then we can start showing you how to use this really awesome open source software. The first thing you're going to need to do is download the client and install Archivist Toolkit onto your machine. You can do so by going to archivisttoolkit.org and grabbing the 2.0 version of the software. You can either download the program for Windows, which is what I and they recommend. I'll be using the program on Windows today. You can also install it on your Mac or Linux using these downloads. After you've downloaded and installed the program, you'll need to first connect the program to a server before it allows you to really use the interface. So what you're going to do is input this connection URL when prompted, along with this username and this password, and that should connect you to the Archivist Toolkit Sandbox version 2.0, which is a toy server that Archivist Toolkit has set up so that people interested in trying out the software can do so without setting up their own local or remote server. Once you've put this information in, what will happen is the software will connect to the server, the sandbox, and then prompt you to put in a username and a password to access the database, the sandbox which you've just accessed. You can use any of these usernames, although each one of them has different rights when it comes to what they are allowed to do within the program. I suggest using super user because you can do anything you want with that username. You're essentially an administrator, and no matter what username you choose to use, every password is a T. So once you've downloaded the program and connected to the server and then put in your login name and password, you should get the initial interface to pop up, and at that point we can start learning how to use the program. Alright, so now that we've set up Archivist Toolkit and connected it to the Sandbox server 2.0 provided by Archivist Toolkit, this is what you should be looking at. We have resources, accessions, subjects, digital objects on the left. This screen which displays right now the resources put within the sandbox by other users of Archivist Toolkit who have used the sandbox as the toy server for their software. And we have new record up here, a search option, some other stuff going on. Right now we're just going to focus though on resources, because resources is what Archivist Toolkit uses to create organized collections, processed collections, and that is probably the most common use of this software. So once you have created your record, it's going to be amongst these many records. You can search through them, you can scroll through them. I'm going to show you one that I came up with in just a little bit, but first we're going to take a look at the new record button. So once you have highlighted resources, you can start a new collection that you are going to organize, that you're going to process by pressing new record. And this is what pops up. We have another display over here, different tabs allowing you to put in different information, which we're going to talk about momentarily. And once you've filled in all of these tabs, once you've put in all this information, or even just some of it, and you need to walk away for a little bit, you can click Save, and the collection will appear right over here. So let me just find my collection real fast so I have some examples to show you of the different types of fields that you can place within it. Alright, so here's mine. I remembered my resource identifier, very important. And we're going to open this guy. It is going to take a little bit longer than making a new record because it has to load all the components. So just give it 1 second and we'll get going. Right, now that we've got my collection open, the Andrew Maloney Game Boy collection that I've created, we're going to talk a little bit about how to enter different levels of a collection into AT, because that's what AT is all about, keeping track of intellectual and physical organization of archival collections. Alright, so for each level of collection, which you can designate with this here, every time you start inputting information about a certain collection, every time you make a new item branch, a new subseries branch, a new collection, you have to designate what level we're talking about. So we're talking about the collection. Every time you create a new facet, you have certain fields that you have to fill in before AT will allow you to save it. So the collection level, the requirements are the level, obviously, so it knows it's a collection, the title, the date expression, which we have the basic date expression here, which I've inputted, as well as fields for ISO format dates, a language expression, a resource identifier, which is what I used before to find my collection. Remember that guy because it'll be really hard to find your collection otherwise within the sandbox, and an extent expression. So my entire collection, as it's just small cartridges and a couple Game Boys, fit in one box. I've used a country code identifier, a fake repository code identifier, and a collections code identifier, a call number for the collection within my resource identifier, which, like I said, pops up over here. And I've inputted the title, the date, the language, and of course the extent. Ignore instances for now. We're going to get to that in a moment. Alright? So once you've inputted this basic information, you can press save, and at that point the collection should appear on the left hand screen with little issue. At that point you are ready to begin inputting either more detailed information about the collection, or you can choose to go back and do that later and begin creating facets for the intellectual arrangement of the collection. But let's talk a little bit more about this detailed information before we get to how to input other facets within the collection. Alright, so let's look at this names and subject tabs. After the basic description has been completed, pretty self-explanatory, we have names and subjects. So names and subjects are access points associated with the collection. I've inputted some here, myself, the creator of the collection, as I've collected all of these Game Boys and Game Boy games. Nintendo, the creator of the Pokemon franchise, Satoshi Tajiri, and then we have subjects down here, electronics, entertainment, handheld video game consoles, etc. I've created all of these access points. What is really interesting, or I should say convenient, about Archivist Toolkit is that once it's connected to a particular database, all of this information, subject access points, name access points, and even some other things that we'll talk about in a bit, are saved within that database on the server that it's connected to. And so when you go back to create or link a new name or subject, you could always use ones that have been created before or create a new one. So let's take a look. If I wanted to add a name to be associated with this collection, I would click Add Name Link. Edit, obviously, would edit a selected name, but we're going to would remove one from this interface, but we're going to add. Now, all these choices are popping up because, like it was the case with the collections, whoops, won't let me do that. Like it was the case with the resources over here in this first screen, these are all names that have been inputted into the sandbox for other projects. You can see the ones that I put in. There's Nintendo, myself, my name is now in this database, and if the name you're looking for is in this database, you can choose it. If not, you have to create a new name. So this is how you create a new name. First, you choose the function of the person. Are they a creator? Are they a source? Are they a subject? Most likely, since I've already designated the major creator of the collection, I'm going to be looking at subject names. At this point, you can choose the role of the person. For Nintendo, I left it blank, as you can see right here. For myself, I was the collector. We have director because Satoshi Tajiri directed the games he was involved with, and the games that are in this collection. But this is not required to create a name. It is just helpful because any information is helpful. Anyways. So the person I'm going to be inputting is Shigeru Miyamoto. He is a game developer who's worked for Nintendo for decades at this point. He's worked on the Legend of Zelda series, on the Mario series, some of the best grossing series Nintendo's ever put out. So he's pretty important, and anyone interested in him might be interested in my Smash and Game Boy collection, as it has a couple games from these series within. Both Zelda and Mario, I believe, are represented in my collection. So I am going to pick subject because, as we spoke about before, I am interested in adding subject access terms. At the moment, I'm going to skip role because he doesn't have any particular role in relation to my collection. I just want his name to be attached to the collection in case someone's doing research on him. And I'm going to create the name. At this point, this dialog will pop up. I have to choose whether he's a person, a corporate body, as Nintendo was, or a family. He's just an individual. And then this larger dialog will pop up. So on the details page, we have his primary name, Miyamoto. We have his first name, Shigeru. He was born in 1952 to present. If you wanted, you could include a title, a suffix, anything of that nature. I'm going to choose local source. Make sure that you designate the source of this subject name that you're including, because if it's an LOC access term, it's good for people to know. If it's NACO, etc. So here we go, and I use DAX in the description that I am going to be including down here on the description note. It's a biography, not an administrative history, but you do have the choice between the two. And I'm just going to include a short bio associated with this particular individual and this access term I'm including. And then I'm going to hit OK. Now, once you've created the name, it still is not linked to your collection. You then have to highlight it as if you were highlighting anyone in this database, and link. And now, if we close this window, Shigeru Miyamoto is a name attached to my collection. Perfect. So now that we've taken a look at how to add a name link, let's take a look at how to add a subject link. When you're ready to add a subject and associate it with your collection, you click Add Subject Link, and you have two choices. First, you can search and scroll through this database of existing subjects, in this case, subjects that have been inputted into the Archivist Toolkit Sandbox 2.0 database by other users, and use those subject headings. Or you can create a new subject, which is what we're going to do today. So I'm going to click on Create Subject and bring up this dialog. It has the subject term, and make sure you fill in and designate what type of subject term this is. These are associated with MARC. This is a genre form, and if you want, you can include source, very important. I'm going to include local source because I'm fabricating all this, but if you use a Library of Congress subject heading or some other standardized subject headings, you could designate that here, and then you come down here and press OK. Now, I got this error message because I've already inputted toys as a subject heading into this database. Yours will just pop up immediately right here with this search box filled with the exact text, but I have to search for mine. Once you've highlighted the subject you've just created, you just press link, and here it is, linked with our collection. Alright, so now that we've taken a look at names and subjects, let's move on to notes, etc. and deaccessions. So any note you can possibly think of: bibliography, general physical description, scope and contents, related materials. You're going to find all of the places to input this information in this one little drop-down menu. So let's say I wanted to include a biographical historical note. I would click that, it'll pop up, and I can put my note in here, I can label my note, you can make it multi-part, all sorts of really cool things, and then press OK, and it'll save it, and it will show up here where my scope and contents and custodial history note are. If you need to edit already created notes, just double click, the note opens up. Here's my note on myself, or rather the materials of the collection, and press OK when you're done with edits, and that's it. Really straightforward. Alright, and the other thing on this page is deaccessions. If you ever need to deaccession an item and make a note of that deaccession, explain why you deaccessioned that item from the collection, you add a deaccession, the date of the deaccession, the description of the item, the reason why it was deaccessioned, the extent of the item or items, and then you just press OK. Obviously I didn't type anything in, so it didn't let me do it. But this is where the deaccessions associated with this particular collection are kept. And finally, we get to the last tab on the collection level, the finding aid data. There are only a few things you really need to put in that are required for the finding aid data. We have the unique identifier, which I've used the fake repository code that I used before, and the collection code at the end there as my unique identifier for the finding aid, my finding aid title, the filing title, so the finding aid date, the date it was created, the author of the finding aid, that I made it clear that I used DAX in the writing of the finding aid, that, and of course the language of the finding aid is very important. There are some other fields over here you can feel free to use. This is a cool one. In process, edit full draft. It lets people know where exactly the finding aid is in its development, and any other notes are right there. The last thing we're going to be going over in resources is how to add different levels to your collection. So this is really straightforward. We're just going to take a quick look. As you can see, I have series, sub-series, and items within my overarching collection. How I added these were with the Add Child and Add Sibling buttons. So essentially, Child is just a level lower than the current level you're on. So if I was on a sub-series and I wanted to add an item, I would highlight the sub-series and press Add Child, and that would allow me the opportunity to input information for a new item or folder. level underneath that subseries. I'm not going to do that though, so I'm going to delete that component. In the same vein, we have a series here. If I wanted to add a new subseries, I could press Add Child. It would allow me to add that component. The Add Sibling button adds another level of the same type. So if I highlighted a series, as I have here, Nintendo Handheld Games, and I pressed Add Sibling, it would add a second series to my collection, of which I could then go lower with the Add Child button, add my subseries items, what have you. Something to keep in mind is that each level has its own required fields before it will be accepted by Archivist Toolkit, like the collection did. So let's go over those really quickly. We have the series. Series required fields include the level itself, the title, the date, the language code if it differs from the collection itself. So if the collection was in English and German and the series was only in German, you would want to make sure to designate that. The component unique identifier, in this case series 1, and the extent. Then we have subseries. Within a subseries, the required fields are the level, the title, the date, the component unique identifier again, 1.1 in this case, extent, and this instance that I've inputted is not required, and we're going to go over that in just a minute, so we're going to skip over it for just a sec. And we have the item level. At the item level, required fields are title, level, date, and actually in this case the instance is required. So let's talk about instances for a second. Instances is just a field that you input the exact location of an item or folder in. So if you look back at the subseries, I used an instance because the subseries was contained in one folder, and in this case I used an instance because this is at the item level. I wanted to tell people exactly where this item resides. In this case it's box 1 in folder 1, and it's the first object in said folder. Besides the required fields, we can also input information in these two tabs on each level of the collection. We have the Names and Subjects tab, which you interface with in the exact same way that we did with the larger collection. You can add a name link, edit name link, remove name link, and do the same with subject. Access terms specific to each individual facet of the collection, each level of the collection. And we also have a notes section where you can input the same notes that you could for the greater collection for each individual facet as well. Besides that, there's not much left to know as far as the basic interface goes with the resources portion of Archivist Toolkit 2.0. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial, and I hope that you've learned something today about this extremely useful open source software, Archivist Toolkit. Thank you.